Welcome to the Franklin Method Fellowship. I'm your co-host Solange Ross, and I'm joined by my colleague Deborah Chassie. We are physical therapists specializing in the pelvic floor. In this podcast, we share our passion for the Franklin Method, an evidence-based therapeutic approach using mental imagery, movement, and awareness to improve posture, the way you move and feel, and overall well-being. We integrate the Franklin Method into functional everyday movements, all forms of exercise, and our physical therapy practices. We also share a love for talking about the pelvic floor. We hope to inspire you to move better and feel better in your body. Always check with your doctor before beginning an exercise program. This podcast is not intended to be used as medical advice. Let's grab your Franklin Method balls and bands. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Franklin Method Fellowship. I'm here with my colleague, Deborah Chassie, and I am Solange Ross. And today we are in episode 11, and we are going over the shoulder. And the shoulder is one of my favorite topics. And it's also something that I need. It's so important for me and my body. And what it so happens that, take a look at the shoulder. Debbie's holding it up. Go ahead, hold it up again. The shoulder was when I took my level 1 Franklin Method training, it was my exam topic. So I think it's just amazing that the universe gives you what you need. So my level 1 topic was intro to the shoulder. And then my level 2 topic was the pecs. So it was again the shoulder.
Right.
And
that's so awesome.
As fate may have it, my level 3 exam topic was on the lungs and the pleura. So
that's crazy. How fun, though. You get to stay focused in one area and see how they were all interconnected.
That's
did. Awesome.
So I really love the shoulder, and I need it for myself. And we all do, with the amount that we use our upper body and our hands in space, the amount that we are on computers and phones. There isn't one person that I can think of that can't benefit from anything on the shoulder. Would you agree?
I would. And so you said that you really needed it for your shoulders. Is there anything that you want to share about that specifically?
Yeah. I mean, I had, probably this is going back to before COVID in 2019. I had some nerve issues with my shoulder, some neural tension, and it really felt like something was wrong in my shoulder. And It's interesting that, when you experience any kind of pain, it's really easy to tunnel into the spot where you feel the pain and to think that that has to be the cause of the problem. And when we look at the shoulder today, and we're going to see that it's not just one joint where the humerus articulates or meets with the scapula, that it's a whole complex. And there are many joints that make up the shoulder that, in my experience, where I was feeling it was really involved with my rib cage and my upper rings and my thorax, as well as the position of my scapula. So even though I was feeling it in a very specific spot in my shoulder and then getting some nervy type symptoms, that was not where the cause of it was. And if I were to just have treated that, I would still be living with the shoulder pain. And we do not want to be in pain.
No.
So what do we know about shoulders? What do we hear from people in the common conditions and complaints that people have about their shoulders?
Well, people may say they have a rotator cuff tear or frozen shoulder or a nerve condition where the nerve is stuck inside the the nerve sheath. That can happen. Or where there's tight muscles causing the shoulder to be tight, but then really the truth is what's causing the tight muscles. Right? Because a lot of times it really boils down to posture, just like you were saying. If the posture is not aligned correctly, then the shoulder girdle is not going to sit in the right position.
No.
It's just so amazing how that works out. About 5 years ago, I was seeing my doctor, my OBGYN, who deals with female conditions, correct? And so I told her that I had been swimming and paddleboarding, and she said, be careful, because women, as they get older, tend to have shoulder problems. And I thought, I'm not going to have shoulder problems. And then it turned out that I did end up having shoulder problems. So
it's really a thing. I've even heard it's called like midlife shoulder, which can present as any of these conditions that you just mentioned. It's like, you're fine, you're doing all these things, and then like one day you have difficulty putting your bra on and reaching behind your back.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, wait, what happened? Or like, why am I limited now in rotation of my shoulder? Like, where did that happen? And sometimes like these things just crop up. And it could be, look, as we age, we do go through a transition, which is happening for many, many years leading up to menopause and beyond. So there are changes in our system, and that all can affect the health of our joints, the health of our connective tissue, our nervous system, and that can all impact the shoulder.
Absolutely. I know. Yeah. And at one point I went and had an MRI, and I was told I had a labral tear. And then it got better, and bought a reclining table. So that's where you flip upside down and you let your spine lengthen. And the other thing I would do is I would bring my arms up like that over my head while I was upside down. And that's what got my shoulder better.
Wow.
From the labral tear. Yeah. So probably lengthening the spine, opening up the ribs and so forth. Yeah.
And those are things that when we go to the playground with our kids and they hang from the monkey bars, right? And they hang upside down, right? They do all these things freely. And then if you think about what adults are doing at the playground, they're sitting around.
Right.
Like maybe some of them are standing. There are sprinkles of adults that are actually playing with their kids. And these things like hanging, and which really does open up the shoulders and open up the spine, they are things that we sort of untrain and train out of our system. And these are things that are so helpful, that distraction to give space in the shoulders. So before we talk more about that, why do we have our shoulders? Like, what do we need this shoulder joint for?
Yeah, well, it allows us to move our arms in space, right? So what if you need to go get a cup of something off the counter, off the shelf? So you reach for a cup, or reach for dishes, or you're carrying something. Or what about some basic daily needs like washing your hair, washing your face, right? Toileting. Those are ADLs, so important.
And if you think about it, if we didn't have the shoulder where it is, and let's say the arm was just connected to our rib cage, how would we do all of those things? It's like I would go and I would hit myself in the face, or I wouldn't have this range of motion. And the shoulder joint, and the shoulder complex, rather, we should say, is really one of the most flexible joints in the body. And I don't necessarily think many people would say that about their shoulders. I think we would hear rather the opposite, which is, I feel tight and stiff. And the muscles of the shoulders, which can hold a lot of tension, get a bad rep for this. But it really is actually one of the most mobile joints in the body.
That's so amazing. And I love the way you show the humorous as though you're trying to feed yourself. I mean, can you imagine trying to feed yourself with the arm that's connected to the rib cage? That's crazy.
And another thing about the shoulders too is, and we've talked about this before in our spine class, is the force absorption. So
Mm,
the shoulders, when we're throwing and catching,
mm,
which are, these are
mm-hmm.
stuff too that a lot of adults might stop doing these sorts of activities as they get older. But the throwing and the catching, the shoulder gives us this force absorption, and then we absorb that, and then we can put it back, that
I
energy
love
back
that.
into the throw. So
Yeah, I love
force
the way that works.
absorption,
Yeah.
you know, rather than thinking of the shoulders as being tight or stiff, they're really so mobile and dynamic, and they can absorb force and then take
Hmm.
that force, store energy, and then convert it into movement.
Yeah. That's awesome. I
And
love that.
I hope as you're sitting with us and listening or watching that you try on some of these movements. Play with the idea
Hmm.
that how would that work if my arm was attached to my rib cage? Could I really absorb force with it there? Like I may just get knocked over. So
Right.
if someone was
Hit
throwing
in the head.
something at me, you know. So
Yeah.
by the shoulder being where it is in this complex, which we're going to look more into, we can absorb that force and then convert it.
Hmm.
And everything
Yeah.
becomes more three-dimensional. And we know
Right.
that when we move through three dimensions, it's more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so awesome. I love that description with force absorption. And you did a great job really explaining that too, to make it really clear. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the other thing, think about the mobility that primates have. Have you ever been to the
Hmm.
zoo and watched primates just
Right.
swinging on trees? And this reminds me again of your hanging and how that helped your shoulder. But it's so
Hmm.
fun to watch primates and the mobility that they have, and just,
Yeah.
you know, to get that idea that we want to have that mobility in
Hmm.
our body. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that right now everyone should go to the park and hang, because we need to meet our body where it's at, right? If
Good
this is
point. Yeah.
something that we've never done before, we can't just go ahead and go for the bar and then just let go and pray for the best. What's going to happen?
Right.
So it can be
Right.
as simply as when you're in the shower, reaching your hand up the wall and then like pressing in or leaning forward, or even your
Hmm.
arm being up against the wall and just bending your knees,
Mm.
or holding on to a bar and just
Yeah.
bending your knees and getting used to the idea of hanging. And
Yeah.
that in itself, those what may seem like baby steps towards hanging can be so beneficial.
So let's go ahead and move our shoulders and go ahead and just lift them up and down and forward and back. What would you say the movement feels like on a scale of 0 to 10, for being 10 being the best it could ever be?
I would say it's probably about a 5.
All right. And I would say mine's a 6 today. Feels really good. So let's do something that would make it maybe get better. Like, why don't we have a 10? What can we do to make it become a 10? Should we have an idea, something that you'd like to do to bring it to a 10?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that?
Well, why don't we think about breathing as we move
All
our
right.
shoulders up
Good,
and
good
down?
idea. So, Solange, you suggested breathing. So let's take a breath in and out and breathe in and out and forward. Breathe in and out as you go back, and then lift your shoulders up and down and forward and back. So, Solange, did that change it for you at all?
Believe it or not, it did. And I'm not even talking about it changed it like a little bit. My movement almost doubled in terms of my range
Wow,
of motion. So I
that's
really
great.
just was like, oh,
You know what I like to think of? If we imagine our shoulder blade to be a slippery, wet bar of soap, and then we lift our shoulder blades up. Oh my goodness. I love the way it feels. And forward and back and up and down and forward and back. Yeah, my shoulders just glide up as I do this. I love it.
And I think we've all had that experience when you have a bar of soap and it's just slipped out of your hand in the shower.
Right, right.
That slipperiness, we're like, oh, there's my soap.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really good when you pick images too to think of something that you love. Let's go right from here to checking in. Yeah, and just notice your shoulders as you're checking in. All right, come on back. 3, 2, 1. How was that for you, Solange?
I really enjoyed that. I felt a lot of width in my shoulders.
Hmm.
The first image that came to me was actually I felt like a linebacker because I felt so broad. And I was like, oh, yeah, I like that sense of
Oh,
broadness in the.
yeah. Yeah, I felt a pull basically in my neck going into my shoulders, but not an
Mm,
uncomfortable pull, more like an opening, right? Where I just
okay,
felt space being created in my neck. Yeah, that felt
nice.
really good. Well, why don't we do something with muscle sponging? So we've talked about this before. So here I have a sponge, and if I squeeze it like that, what happens? What's happening to the water
We're
inside the sponge?
we're squeezing out all of that water and
Right.
all of the
So,
stuff that doesn't need to be in there.
right. And we call that waste products in our
Okay.
body. So waste products are things in our body that we don't want. So let's go ahead and just do that to release some tension. All we have to do is just squeeze like we're squeezing a sponge. And we can move our hand all around. And we can even bring our arm out a little bit if we want, or back, or forward, or rotate it. I like the rotation.
Oh, that feels nice.
Hmm. So you could either rotate the way Solange is rotating with her elbow bent, or your elbow can be just slightly bent. Whatever feels more relaxing for you. And this is going to help with the connection between our body and our brain by sponging the shoulder. In the Franklin method, we say better information leads to better navigation.
Right. And if we are holding tension in our body that doesn't need to be there, it's going to be more difficult to our muscles for them to move because if they're holding tension, then they're busy holding tension and they're not available for movement.
Yeah.
I'm
And I
trying
like to,
now. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I like holding my biceps too and just rotating my arm around it. I just automatically went to that because it just feels so good. What were
Yeah.
you going to say, Solange?
I was holding the shoulder and doing a swimming motion of it.
Mm,
And just as I'm swimming, I was just kind of imagining the muscle as I'm squeezing it and squeezing the waste products out, just that
mm,
the whole shoulder is just those muscles are just gliding over the bones.
mm. It does feel really good.
And it also feels good to me to like squeeze the tricep too and squeeze the back of the
Yeah.
arm and rotate it. I like that.
Yeah. So let's compare how we did with our shoulder with the arm that you sponged. That's your left compared to the other. Or lifting our shoulders up. Ooh, that feels really good too on the right side, the side that I
Yeah,
did.
I
Yeah.
definitely can feel more space
Mm-hmm.
in the shoulder
Ooh.
and
Uh-huh.
it feels light. There's a lightness
And check
to
your
it.
hamstring length.
And it's interesting too, because I wouldn't have thought that that tension was there
Mm-hmm.
until I did this exercise to take the tension out. And
Right.
then I noticed, wow, that's so much better. So
Yeah.
I really encourage all of you to do these muscle sponging exercises that release tension because sometimes we hold tension, but it doesn't manifest as pain yet. And the idea is that we don't want to get to that point where our body and our nervous system is sending pain signals. We want to make sure the tension is not there so our movement can be as efficient as possible and to be doing these things throughout the day. So we don't just then address our body when we have these signals that, like, oh, I feel really tight. Now I have to do something. If we're
Yeah.
doing this all along, we kind of stay ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's do the other side. We don't want to be imbalanced today.
No. It even feels very comforting to me just to squeeze the shoulder, to feel the
Yeah.
arm even hanging and just rotating a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the deltoids, there's a back portion and a front portion and a middle portion. So we can get all of those different segments of the muscle.
Yeah. And I'm noticing that because my fingers are kind of along the back side of it, and
Mm-hmm.
my thumb is kind of around the midsection of it, that it's a little bit sore along that back edge.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it feels good as I kind of squeeze and separate that back edge.
Mm, that feels good. Yeah, and I've noticed in the past because this is where I feel most of my tension, right over by the triceps and where there's basically just the fascia attaching to the bone.
Mm,
So I notice when I do that a lot, squeeze it and move it, that it really decreases that sensitivity by repeatedly on a daily basis, just sponging it and rotating it.
yeah. So this is a good one to do as like a break if you're doing work on the computer, sponge your
Mm,
shoulders, do some random movement, whatever feels good to you. Or if you are working with a shoulder problem, make sure that you're moving within a range that feels pain-free to you.
correct.
So
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
really
have to,
important.
yeah, you don't have to go above 90 if that introduces pain.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really important to not be in a pain cycle.
I'm also going to sponge the bicep a little bit because I enjoyed that too.
Yeah, I really like that. It's one of my favorites. My daughter had some carpal tunnel problems, and she would always want me to work on it. And so then after that level that we worked on the shoulder sponging for Franklin method, I did that on her, where I started up at her shoulder, worked all the way down to her arm and hand, and that got rid of her hand pain. It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a really nice sequence with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, feel the difference in the hamstrings.
Definitely. And the
Yeah, because
balance.
mm-hmm.
And again, I really want to emphasize that people should do these sponging exercises because I wasn't thinking before that my shoulders felt tense. They felt fine. But
Yeah.
now that I know that the movement is much more free after just spending a few minutes on each side, why wouldn't I want to do that before I swim or play a sport? Why would I want that extra tension with me when I can easily eliminate it and then
Yeah.
have my
So
body
true.
working in just the right amount?
So let's go ahead and take a look at the shoulder girdle. And how many joints are there in the shoulder, Solange?
Well, I mean, I guess that depends, who you're asking,
That's
right?
right. If you ask a physical therapist, well, let's look at which bones we have that we're going to talk about. We actually have three joints that we're going to be talking about. So we have the glenohumeral joint, which is right it's attached to this. And by the way, this is my bones from PT school. I still have them. They're still around. They're still functioning.
That's
And
amazing.
so look at how it articulates here. So this is the humeral head. See how it's rounded.
Hmm.
And this is, I'm showing you the back side. I'll show you the front side soon. But this is how it fits in the shoulder girdle. And look, it's not touching anything, right?
Mm.
So we're going to talk about that some later too. And then we have the acromioclavicular joint. So this is the acromion process, and this is the clavicle. So it's called the acromioclavicular. And then now I'm going to show you the front side of the scapula and the humerus and the clavicle and how they look from the front. So here is the humerus and the humeral head. And this is the glenohumeral fossa right here. There's a little metal piece so that I can use that to hold the humeral head in place. And when you have it attached like this, look, there's no, it's not a ball and socket like at the hip joint. It's just, you have the glenohumeral fossa right here, and then you have the acromion process. So the acromion process is attached to the clavicle. So this is the acromioclavicular joint. And then you have the clavicle that is attached to the sternum. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. So let me,
Yeah, and I just want to give people a look here at the glenohumeral joint also. So you can see how the head of the humerus and the glenoid fossa of the scapula, how that's really shallow compared to this big head, this big round ball shaped head. So you can
mm-hmm,
really see how it's not like the hip joint where it's this socket covering the head of the femur. It's this kind of shallow socket, and you have a big head resting in it. So we're going to require much more muscular support to make sure that this head stays centered in the socket and it doesn't translate up or it doesn't slip off of the socket in some way, or as we're moving our
yeah,
arm, that it stays connected, this
yeah.
shallow socket.
So I wanted to show you too where the clavicle attaches to the sternum. So here you have the clavicle and it attaches to the sternum. Here is the manubrium and the sternum. So this manubrium is technically part of the sternum because this is called the sternoclavicular joint right here. So this is
Mm.
where the clavicle attaches to the sternum. And notice here's your first rib. Notice that the first rib is right under that. And so you get this gliding motion right under that clavicle too.
Well, we're going to get into that shortly, but that's a little teaser because, right, we're talking about the the joints, right? So we talked
Right.
about these three joints. First, the glenohumeral joint, the humeral head, and that shallow socket, and then the acromioclavicular joint, where the acromion meets the collarbone. and then now
Right.
this sternoclavicular joint. So yeah, so some people might say there are three joints because these are what would be considered synovial joints with a joint capsule and synovial fluid, which is really slippery and slidey. But as you just spoke about, there are other functional joints in the shoulder and or shoulder complex. And if we don't look at these functional joints or sliding surfaces and address those as well, we're missing out on a lot of places where movement can occur. And it's these functional joints where muscles slide on top of muscles, where we have clavicle sliding over first rib, that these are areas where lots of people get problems with, and they can lead to issues like compression for nerves, pain in the shoulder. So,
Right. Yeah, because you know, your pecs are in this direction here. So if there's some compression, then it can compress the nerves that go under the pecs. And then that
mhm.
can cause other types of shoulder problems too. And so, yeah, the scapula, thank you for sharing all of that too. That's a really important piece. The scapula sits on the ribs like this. And so when you go to lift up your arm, right, it has to slide on the ribs,
Mm.
right? And so one of the things that we did is imagine that your shoulder blade was a slippery bar of soap. And so if you just imagine that gliding and it just moves so much more freely.
Mm. Or even just the scapula, I'm thinking of just lifting and lowering my shoulder, and the idea that the scapula is gliding up and down along the curve of the rib cage, if you want to show that.
Yeah, right. So just like that. And also you're getting movement in the sternoclavicular joint too, right?
Yeah, we could
Yeah.
definitely see how when you do that, the
Or,
collarbone is moving up and down, and that it's not only the scapula that's moving.
and look at this when you go forward and back with your shoulders, forward and back. Here we have the scapula that's sliding up and down and forward and back. And then it also slides out to the side when you bring your arm straight up. So if you imagine bringing your arm straight up like that, right, you're going to get this type of a motion. And so we want it to be nice and flexible and smooth and glidey and spacious when we move our shoulders.
Yeah, and a lot of times in exercise, we're cued to pull the shoulder down, right? Have you ever heard that
Yeah.
as someone is lifting their arm up to pull your shoulder blade down, let your shoulder
Oh,
blade pull
right.
down your
Yeah.
back? But then you just showed me as the arm lifts up how that scapula is kind of swinging. So if we
Hmm.
are using that cue of pull your shoulder down when that scapula should actually be swinging, as we're moving the arm, we're putting tension and more resistance into the movement
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
the arm.
Sounds very uncomfortable.
It does. And I want to share too, when we were learning in school these PNF patterns for the scapula, I remember just trying to mobilize someone's scapula, and we were trying to bring the scapula like up and forward and then down and back. What would have been the motion that you were showing gliding on the rib cage. And I had such trouble doing that mobilization because one, I wasn't thinking about the scapula gliding on the curve of the rib cage. I was kind of just trying to move it up and down
Mm.
and then to separate it like out to the side, but really to see that it is going along this curve. And then when you reach forward, it does have to come around this curve, and it does
Hmm.
have to rotate and swing a little bit when you lift the arm. That would have changed the way I was trying to move that scapula on my partner. And
Yeah,
it's
totally.
certainly the Franklin method approach to really understanding the functional anatomy, that helps change the movement of my shoulders as I bring them up and down. If I
Hmm.
just think of those slippery bars of soap just going up and down in a straight plane, I have much less range of motion than thinking about them following the curve of my rib
Mm.
cage.
I love that. I'm glad that you're talking about the curve of the rib cage because look at how much it curves, right? And here you've got it angling downward towards the
And
sternum, just
so,
slightly.
yeah. So if we think about when we're moving our shoulders in different ways, that this scapula is really going on a journey. It's
Hmm.
it's exploring up and down, and then it's going out to the sides and coming around, and then it can rotate when we lift our arm. That's very different than thinking about it just going up, down, out, in.
Yeah, that's
Windshield
so true.
wipers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I love that image of the rounded rib cage. And then you can see how important the rib cage is. You were mentioning how by correcting your thoracic ring, so the rib cage is basically the thoracic rings, right? So a thoracic ring would be here. So if by correcting it and to align that correctly, how it would allow the shoulder to move better.
Definitely. When I align this certain segment of my rib cage, the rings that are a little bit off, that changes the muscular pull on those rings. And then they can, my whole shoulder feels stronger. My core
Hmm.
feels stronger because everything is in a proper alignment
Yeah.
versus it the muscles being pulled out of alignment from that one ring that's not slotted in the right place. And that's really interesting too, because if I were just to go on a straight strengthening protocol and to strengthen in that faulty alignment, I will at a certain load get compression and other, like if the load is challenging enough, there is going to be some failure, which is going to affect in the shoulder because those rings are coming out of alignment. So
Hmm.
that's been really interesting. And I'll also share one other thing. I remember too in my early years as a PT, I was treating a patient with frozen shoulder and we were trying to get her external rotation back. And I was spending a few sessions just mobilizing and mobilizing that glenohumeral head, and I wasn't really getting anywhere. And I was kind of frustrated with it. And at the time, didn't have the knowledge to look more globally.
And one of the things that I like to measure initially with patients, even at the day of their visit, coming in for subsequent treatments, is to measure shoulder range of motion. I do that as a regular testing assessment each day. And so then even if I'm treating another part of their body, and then I'll come back and recheck to see how did it affect the shoulder. And hands down, if I treat the thoracolumbar spine or the pelvis or the cervical spine or the head, that it makes a change in the shoulder without even touching the shoulder. It's so amazing.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
so important. I love doing these self checks and things because that's really important for the brain. And in the recovery
Hmm.
process, people can sort of latch on with that, like, oh, because again, they feel the pain there, that's where the issue is. But then
Hmm.
when we do all these other things in treatment, like when you correct stuff in the thorax, you correct stuff in the
Yes.
lumbar, and they can see, wow, my range of motion got better. Then they can start to really understand the big picture, and the brain can get on board and say, no, it's not in the shoulder, even though that's where I feel the symptoms, that's reacting to something
Yeah.
elsewhere in the body. And that's how
Yeah.
we can really change these long standing patterns.
Right.
And The scapula is such a fascinating bone when we look at it,
Yeah,
right? Like I wouldn't even necessarily describe it as triangular shape, right? Like I would
right.
say almost maybe it's like an angel's wing, you
Ooh,
know,
yeah,
it could be an
right.
angel's wing
Mm-hmm.
or yeah. And noticing
Yeah.
that like there's different bony prominences on it. When we think
I
of a
love the way you can see
triangle,
ridges here too. Can you
there's
see the ridges?
ridges. Yeah, and
Yeah.
imagining ridges that like those ridges, those are going to be attachment sites for muscles. That's very different than thinking about a triangle. It in no way is
Mm-hmm.
it's a triangle.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, we've got more than three sides here. That is a triangle, three sides, three equal sides.
So let's take a look again at the rib cage of that sliding surface that you were showing for the clavicle and the rib.
Here you have your clavicle, scapula, and your sternoclavicular notch. And the clavicle creates a joint when it's articulating. So articulating meaning being connected to the sternoclavicular notch. And underneath, can you see the first rib? So if I lift it up, there's the first rib.
Yeah.
And if I bring it down, so it slides over that first rib, and sometimes that causes problems too. So here, the humerus, the humeral head, attaches, articulates with the glenohumeral fossa, and the deltoid muscle comes right over here, and there's a bursa there too. So the deltoid has to slide over that bursa to protect the joint. And that's also really important so that you can have more flexibility in your movement.
And that's what we experienced when we did that beautiful muscle sponging and we were moving
Mm-hmm.
our arm. That is affecting the deltoid and the bursa, giving that sliding
Yeah,
of it.
absolutely. Right. And if the deltoid is tight, then what's it going to do to the joint? So if you can imagine the tension in the deltoid compressing the humeral head into the fossa.
Definitely. And what a lot of people can experience too is this humeral head butting up on the acromion process. So when they raise their arm, they can get compression of the head butting up there instead of the head just sliding freely in the joint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can
And
see that.
and once this area gets inflamed, it's hard to calm it down. It's like
Yeah.
once an area is inflamed, then all other things start to work more than they should. And that's where muscles from the pec start to come in and say, well, I can help out here. I can
Mm-hmm.
do something. Or muscles from the neck, the trapezius, they
Mm-hmm.
can come in instead of all the muscles working in just the right amount to just let the humeral head just slide in the socket. So it's really amazing. There are a lot of places where we move in the shoulder, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
identified different synovial joints with the capsule and the fluid, but then these functional joints, which are really, really important, these sliding surfaces where lots of people have issues there.
Yeah, so important to be looking at the functional joints because that's really what it's about, right? We're all looking for good function.
So we're going to stand up now and let's do an exercise where we're going to be reaching with our arm and we're going to move at different places and explore all the different places that can move. So we're going to reach forward and first we're going to do it from our arm, then from our shoulder, and then from our spine. And when we come back up, we're going to do it from the spine, then our shoulder, then our arm. So let's try that again. Arm, shoulder, spine, spine, shoulder, arm. Again, arm, shoulder, spine, spine, shoulder, arm. Last time, arm, shoulder, spine, spine, shoulder, arm. And then let your arm just relax by your side.
My jaw feels really soft after
Nice.
doing that.
I feel like my arm has kind of been stretched and lengthened out. And I'm just thinking, applying this into real life, how when I go to take dishes out of the cabinet, for example, I don't think that I'm using range of motion in all of these places. Like I just experienced that I can really stretch my arm out very far by moving my arm, then the whole shoulder girdle, and then the spine. And when I go to reach up, I feel like I use just a portion of the range of motion that's available to me. And it's interesting because these are tasks that are sort of automatic. But
Mm-hmm.
what if we practiced and trained in reaching overhead using all of those options that we have? That's how we could really improve our range of motion. So we're working the whole shoulder girdle, we're getting the spine involved also.
I like how you're pointing that out, how we need to involve not only the arm reaching, but also the shoulder girdle and then the spine. Because a lot of times we might like really just try to stretch the arm, but we're not getting the full movement that we could be functionally by getting to the spine.
Yeah. And one thing also to note is that when we are lifting our arm overhead, that like our spine isn't at that point flexing forward. Our spine is actually extending. So if we're missing that extension in the upper part of our spine, then that's going to really limit our our shoulder range of motion. So we're going
Yeah.
to be doing it from other areas. If we're not going to move there, frequently what's going to come in is something in the lower back because
Mm,
our body's going to
yeah.
say, okay, upper spine can't do it. Well, I got something else to assist you.
Hmm.
So that's where it's important to first notice, how is my upper spine moving? Am I getting extension? And
Hmm.
we have two beautiful episodes on the spine where we mobilize in flexion and extension, and we really open that up. So really
Mm,
bringing that into our reaching,
yeah.
where we're getting that extension.
Yeah. I love that.
Shall we do the other side?
I was hoping we would.
So we're going to reach with the arm, then reach with the shoulder, then reach with the spine, and then spine, shoulder, arm. I'm going to do the arm, shoulder, spine, spine, shoulder, arm, arm, shoulder, spine, spine, shoulder, arm, arm, shoulder, spine, spine, shoulder, arm. One more time. Arm, shoulder, spine, spine, shoulder, arm.
Mm.
And this is a good opportunity when we do these exercises to notice differences between right and left. Like you may notice that when you reach forward from the shoulder girdle, one side has more range of motion than the other. So beginning to notice how that is, and then take a look at like, okay, well, maybe is that because when I put things away, like when I put things into my cupboard, I do it heavily by lifting my right arm up. So let
Mm-hmm.
me try and challenge my left side and give my left side that motion. And
Good point.
I know also for myself, my rib cage is a little bit in a rotation. So if I'm slightly rotated, I'm going to have less motion when I reach on one side because that's de-rotating me.
Yeah.
So as you start to discover the ways in which your body moves, you can be that then begin to be aware of all of this in your functional movements so that you can change these patterns.
Mm. That's great. Great way to bring that all together. So, yeah, let's look at the trapezius muscle. So we have the trapezius muscle that is coming down, and it actually comes over the spine of the scapula to the deltoid. So there's a fascial connection between the trapezius and the deltoid. So a way to get to practice that and image it, put your hand on your trapezius muscle, which is basically right here. And if you feel right on your shoulder blade here, that's the spine of the scapula. And
Mm.
so just go ahead and just brush down over the deltoid. And as you're doing that, picture a waterfall just sliding down and brushing over your deltoid.
Mm.
When I was in Costa Rica, I saw so many waterfalls. Oh my goodness, they were
Oh.
amazing. Big, giant ones up at the volcanoes. So that's what I'm
And
picturing right now.
and we have a beautiful Franklin method image to share
Yes.
as you continue to brush down your arm. We will share the image of the waterfall.
And as you're pulling that up too, you can imagine it also coming from your collarbone. So not only from the spine of the scapula, but also from the front
Mm.
collarbone. That adds a different perspective to it. And look at
Yes,
that picture. That picture is amazing, huh?
you can see how it's really that waterfall is going to the collarbone and it is going to the spine of the scapula and then cascading all the way down the shoulder from the back, the side, and the front.
It feels so good. I just want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and stop and then just compare to the left side how that feels. And just notice it in your posture too. You know, I feel like the back of my head is lifted from doing
Mm.
that. And it feels like it's easier to breathe. What do
I
you
def
notice, Solange?
I definitely feel like my shoulder is more back in space on that side, and I
Mm,
feel just a lot of space in general in the shoulder.
mm-hmm,
I also feel less tension in my hand. My hand feels
mm,
relaxed on that side.
nice.
And I also feel like I have a bigger imprint of the foot on this side
Mm,
into the ground.
mm,
So my
wow.
arch is a little bit more relaxed, whereas the other side, it feels like a little bit more gripped and lifted.
Wow, that's great. Shall we do the other side?
Yeah, let's do the other
So,
side.
right, find the spine of the scapula. So if you bring your hand back to your shoulder blades, and this is where the ridge is, and also the clavicle in the front, and just slide your hand over the deltoid and down your arm, and imagine that to be a waterfall.
And even just rubbing on the ridge, the spine of the scapula, that's such a great place for people to rub on. So many
Mm-hmm.
muscular connections there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And remember that that waterfall goes to the collarbone in the front and getting the front of the shoulder, the side of the shoulder, the back of the shoulder. The waterfall is flowing down all three-dimensionally around the shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Very calming.
Mm. And I know that on my shoulder, that this shoulder tends to sit more forward. So I'm imagining more of the water flowing and like the back part of the shoulder
Mm.
to give that a
Way
little
to
bit.
counterbalance that, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. To
Mm-hmm.
focus on the back part a little bit
Yeah.
more. And even trying to hear the sound of the waterfall,
Mm.
that sound of rushing water.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's good. When we're using imagery, I like to picture some experience that I've had and where it was a powerful experience and use that with my imagery. Takes me right there.
And also to remember that imagery is a multisensorial experience, right? So the more that we can bring into it, you know, can you imagine yourself in that space? What's the
Yeah.
temperature of the water? What's the
Mm.
smell of the water?
So funny. I keep picturing being right there where the waterfalls were.
Yeah,
I'll
like,
have to send you a picture.
yeah, it's like, are you looking at the waterfall or are you standing maybe under the waterfall and really
Yeah.
experiencing the waterfall in your body?
So let's go ahead and do a comparison between the two for the trapezius and where we did the brushing down of the trapezius muscle. And just notice your posture and standing and how that feels in your posture, first of all. And notice your breath. And how about arm movement? Ooh, I feel like a monkey right now. I feel like my arms are really long.
Yeah.
What do you notice, Solange?
I feel the length in my arms. I'm also just noticing kind of the scapula like wings
Oh,
as I
yeah.
lift my arms.
I picture the chimpanzees just swinging around and having that
Yeah.
length in their arm and how good that feels.
And I just keep thinking again, too, that a lot of times we go to the activity to do it without giving our body the prep work that it needs to do the activity. So
Mm-hmm.
doing these imagery exercises so that we've improved the function and then going in to do that hanging in the gym, whether
Yeah.
or you're holding on to something and bending, how this is such a beautiful way to organize the shoulder first
Mm-hmm.
to then get the most bang for our buck from those
Yeah.
exercises so that we're really
Yeah.
training in good alignment and good function. We're going to experience how when we embody support from below and lower down to the ground, how that can take a lot of tension off of the neck and shoulders. So we're going to tap the ground. So our feet support our legs support our thighs support our pelvis supports the spine supports the rib cage supports the sternum supports the collarbone supports the scapula, and the arm hangs from the scapula. And then let's go in reverse. So our arm hangs from the scapula. Our scapula is supported by the collarbone. The collarbones rest in the sternum. The sternum is supported by the rib cage. The rib cage is supported by the spine. The spine is supported by the pelvis. The pelvis is supported by the legs. The legs are supported by the feet. The feet are supported by the ground. And last time, the ground supports the feet. The feet support the legs. The legs support the thighs. The thighs support the pelvis. Pelvis supports the spine. Spine supports the rib cage. Rib cage supports the sternum. Sternum supports the collarbones. Collarbones support the scapula. And the arm hangs from the scapula. And now let's notice our posture. Let's notice our shoulder position. You want to lift an arm up. Notice your breathing.
You know what I'm noticing is my pelvis feels so supportive. Are you noticing anything in another part of your body?
I have a strong sensation in my feet. Like my feet feel like they're really into the rug. So I can feel like if my rug was sand, like I would be having a nice imprint of my feet into that sand.
Nice. That's a beautiful image.
And I feel like my center of gravity is much lower. So the lower that we can embody support, the less tension we will have in our shoulder girdle.
Well, and we were talking about the collarbone, and we talked about the pectoralis, major and minor muscles that are here in our shoulder, right? So we also have another muscle called the subclavius, and that's right under the collarbone, and it's attached to the collarbone. So if we do some tweezing of the clavicle, we'll actually improve the mobility of our clavicle on that first rib. And I do want to tell you a little story about it first. I was swimming the other day, and someone was telling me that his nose gets very congested, or sinuses, I should say. His sinuses get very congested when he swims. And I said, well, you must be overworking your pecs. And I said, here, I showed him right where to rub. So here's the collarbone. I said, go right to the middle of it and right underneath, and go ahead and rub that right underneath. And so he did it on both sides at the same time. And he goes, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I can breathe now. Isn't that crazy how that just opens up the sinuses?
And I think too, it's important to note too that this muscle, the subclavius, it's innervated by the phrenic nerve, which is the same nerve that innervates the diaphragm. So it makes sense too that that would help with breathing.
Yeah, right. So go ahead and take your fingers, and what you're going to do is just pinch around your clavicle.
And to get there, it may help if you lean yourself forward.
Definitely.
It's also the motion to, like when you make a pie crust and you pinch the sides.
Yeah.
Do you like to bake? I like to work with my hands.
Yes, I do too. All right. Now I think we've tweaked it enough and tweezed it.
And I think something to notice too, that this can be a very sore area on a lot of people. So doing a little bit goes a long way. So you don't have
Yeah.
to spend, 5 minutes on this area. Even 1 minute can be beneficial, and better to go a little bit less on the first time. Less is more, especially if you're having any sort of compression or, you feel a little bit irritated. You want to find just the right amount. You don't want to overdo it.
How does that feel in your shoulder that you did?
Oh, it feels nice. Really
Mm-hmm.
nice.
Yeah. Let's
And
do the other side.
I'm also imagining too that after that, I have more space in between the collarbone and the first rib, that there's just more
Ooh,
space for
yeah,
sliding.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. So let's do the other side. So I'm going to lift my shoulder blade up, shrug my shoulder, and just get under there and tweak that.
Hmm. And I really encourage you guys to go as you tweeze along the collarbone to go by what you sense and feel in your body. Like you will know if there's a spot that you need to spend a little more time on. Like I can kind of feel like somewhere in the middle of the length of the collarbone that like there's a little bit of tenderness on this side. So that's kind of where I'm drawn to. But you
Mm-hmm.
are the detective as you tweeze along it and you make the pie crust. So you
Mm-hmm.
get to determine where you work on in your body. That's the beauty of it.
And you'll know how to move your shoulder too. So as I'm tweezing, I've got a pinch on my it's actually the subclavius muscle. And then I'm just kind of moving my shoulder around too. So I've got my shoulder, my hand supported on my thigh. I've got my foot elevated on a chair. That's how it's
Mhm.
supported. And just moving it a little bit. So basically what I'm doing is using my shoulder to move that muscle between my fingers.
Mm.
I felt like there was an opening in the back of my head.
Yeah. I definitely
Yes.
can feel that connection to breathing, where like I feel like it opened my nasal passages a bit.
Yeah. And I feel like my posture feels better supported.
Yeah. And this is too the perfect time of year for this because we're now in transition between the seasons. So as
Yeah.
you start to get those allergy type symptoms that can come with season
Mm,
change, this is a great way to improve breathing.
yeah. Very true. And even with people, sometimes people are picking up colds and flus and things like that. And you want to be able to have your sinuses open. So it's a great time to open them up so that they can drain fully.
Mm. So the last exercise that we're going to do in this practice for today is something for the scapula. And so we're going to feel on the scapula what's called the coracoid process. And that is this bony part in the front. So the scapula sits on the back of the rib cage, and we looked at that. But then we have this part of the scapula where we feel in the front. So we're going to feel that, and then we're going to do an imagery exercise that's going to give us some space in the shoulder. So if we go ahead and palpate along the front, so I'm running my fingers across the collarbone, and then just under the collarbone, there's kind of a bony prominence that sticks out. And if you give that a rub, it may be tender. And what I want you to do, if you think that you've found the spot, is go ahead and lift your arm. And so what happens when you lift your arm is that that prominence should go away. And then when you lower your arm, you should feel it again. So If you're a little bit too far over onto the side and you're on your arm bone, you could also be feeling what's called the greater tubercle of the humerus. If you're on that and you lift your arm, you will feel the bone the whole time. But if you're on this coracoid process, which is part of the scapula, when you lift your arm up, it goes away. And then when you lower the arm down, you can feel it again. So we're going to now imagine this bony prominence to be a big sparkly eye.
Mm.
So if you can imagine it to be a big sparkly eye with big eyelashes, bright-eyed, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So as you rub in a circular motion, imagine big eyes, a big eye over this process. And make sure you're breathing. And then just let your arm relax down by your side. And go ahead and lift that arm up and down and compare to the other side.
You know, today is just a jaw day. Again, jaw feels opened up.
And this is such an important point to rub on because that process is a site for important muscular attachments. It's a site of attachment for the pecs. It's also an attachment site for the arm muscles as well. So what that's doing by rubbing on it is it's giving some freedom of motion to these muscular attachment sites. So let's go ahead and find that on the other side. So you start from the collarbone, you make your way across out to the side, and then you'll find this bony bump. And then go ahead and lift your arm. And when you lift the arm, the bump should disappear. And when you lower your arm, it should return. And if you're too far over, you will stay on the bump the whole time. So once you've found that spot, and it usually is pretty easy to find, there's usually some tenderness on the spot, go ahead and rub that in a circular motion. And then we're going to bring in our fabulous image of the coracoid process as this big sparkly eye.
Do you see my eyes?
Oh, wow. There it is. Show that again.
This is actually my eyeglass case.
I can't believe you happen to have that.
I know. I was just looking down and I realized, oh, there's some eyes there. That's cool.
Oh my gosh.
I like using my shoulder to rub that bone too. So in other words, I'm pushing the coracoid process, which is part of the scapula, into my fingers.
Mm.
So it's another way to actually massage that.
Yes. Right. To feel that mobility as you move the shoulder. And you could also push the coracoid process, push that to move the shoulder back, push it to move the shoulder up and around. So you're giving that assistance there.
Yeah.
As you move the shoulder. Oh, I love that. Let's let the arm hang by the side and notice our arm as we lift it up. And your eyeglass case just brought this image to me too of I'm imagining kind of my sternum to be the bridge of my nose and like the glasses would be the coracoid process.
That's a good image.
All right. So like you've got this big nose and like these big shades.
Hmm. Yeah. Mm. I love these practice sessions.
Well, I'm relaxed and ready to start my day, and I hope everyone
Yeah.
else is too.
All of them
Yeah.
just made such great changes in my body. And I hope all of you, as you're practicing them with us, that you were able to experience those changes too and really listen to some of the great input that we had for you regarding the functioning of the body and how we can use it in our daily life. So thank you so much for all of you joining us. And we love seeing you. And we're so glad that we are able to share this with you. It is definitely something that we love doing. I don't even want to
Definitely.
call it a labor of love because it's actually just love.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a
So there's
great message.
no labor involved, just total loving it and wanting to share. So it's
It-
so great to see all of you. And Solange, what are we going to do next time?
so next time we are going into our feet.
Yay! I love working with the feet.
So it was so great to practice with you all today. And Deborah, I'm so grateful for this practice with you, for sharing our passion that we have with Franklin Method. And we will see you next week for the feet. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave us a review. You can also become a patron of the podcast. Join our patron program to get access to movement practices from each episode, bonus episodes, and Q&As where we answer any questions you have about the practices. We look forward to practicing with you and continuing to share our passion. As we say in the Franklin Method, better information leads to better navigation. Keep practicing, and we'll see you next time.